game over. Yankees win. The Yankees win.
The windup and the pitch. Montero drives one in the air. Deep right field. It's got a chance. Grand slam. Grand slam, Miguel Montero. Cubs lead 7-3.
Scored by the first down at the 14. Montgomery back in, and here's Montgomery breaking a couple of tackles and winds up with a first down and a touchdown. Up the middle, Zibanejad. He goes to the net. He scores! He scores! The Rangers win! Mika Zibanejad with 5 goals!
Home run! Number 3 of the night for Robinson Cano!
Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Kearns. With me today, as always, is Swig. And the first topic we're going to talk about today in our news segment is Steve Cohen buying the New York Mets. It's been a while since we've talked a little bit of baseball, and there has been some news around the world of baseball. Not so much in any other sports as of right now. But we do have I also want to mention, we do have an NBA draft episode coming up. I know we talked about the breakdown of where we think they'll go. We will do a review episode that'll drop on Saturday instead of the usual Thursday. We're going to do that raw reaction after the draft. But Steve Cohen is now the owner of the New York Mets, which is big time. What did you like out of Steve Cohen, and do you think he's the right fit for the Mets?
Honestly, as much as I hate to say it, man, I liked it a lot. It's going to make a huge difference for the Mets going forward. They finally got the Wilpons out of there who've been meddling and tampering and everything a Mets executive has been trying to do for decades. Cohen is by far the wealthiest owner in baseball. He is a lifelong Mets fan. He's made it very clear in press conferences and on social media interacting with fans that he is all in. So the Mets are now going to be one of the financial giants of the sport, along with the Yankees and the Dodgers and teams like that, who have basically unlimited financial resources. And the Wilpons won't have their fingers over it anymore. It is a huge deal for the Mets and a huge opportunity for them. This might be their most important offseason in decades.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more there. It's crazy because there's a lot of good players out there right now. You have Trevor Bauer, you have JT Realmuto. There's a lot of players that are available right now in free agency, and a lot of them fill the needs for the Mets. Maybe a George Springer fits for them. But regardless, Steve Cohen is now there. He has a lot of money, and it was clear from the press conference the direction that he's going. He's going to bring in a lot of players that fill needs, and he just wants the team to win. And that's something as a fan you can absolutely love because he's one of you essentially, and he has the money to help you out a little bit by getting some reinforcements on the team that have been much needed over the last few years.
No doubt whatsoever. No, there's no doubt in my mind that Steve Cohen is excited to come in and put his fingerprints all over this team, really make a splash, really make a statement that this is the direction the Mets are going to be going. I would be surprised if they don't make a serious run at or even land at least one of the big free agents on the market, a Realmuto, a George Springer. They have plenty of needs on the roster, and they also have a very young, talented core, both in the pitching rotation with DeGrom and Stroman taking the qualifying offer. They could still use a pitcher or two, and then that lineup, though, with Pete Alonso and Michael Conforto and McNeil, it's a mostly young team, and that's cost controlled for the moment. The Mets can bring in a couple of big-time free agents to supplement that, and they could be very dangerous here as soon as next season.
And the division is still tough. The Marlins are on the rise. They made the postseason. The Braves are going to be around for a long time. Phillies have been up and down. I mean, they're finally trying to get a GM there. But I mean, even the Nationals, they won a World Series title as early as 2 years ago. So it's a tough division to compete in, but with the Mets getting the right pieces, I think they can easily be the number one team in that division.
They very well could be. Just the fact that Cohen is there makes that more possible, but it is far from a guarantee. Let's try not to get too far ahead of ourselves here. I think the Braves at the moment should be considered the favorite in that division. They also have a loaded young core. They're not quite as flush with cash necessarily, but they still have the resources to go out and make a splash. We'll see what happens with Marcell Ozuna, who's been in contact with the Mets from what I've heard as well. So he's somebody to keep an eye out for. The Nationals could bounce back with that pitching rotation. We know they had a rough 2020. 2020. The Marlins, still think, need a little bit of time, but they have a pretty loaded farm system, and they have some guys that you definitely need to watch out for. Also just hired the first female GM in sports history here. So, I'm very curious to see how she does. I think it's a great moment in sports there. But the division is, to me, very up in the air between every team except the Phillies at the moment. There's arguments you could make for every other team. I still think the Marlins are a year or two away, but the Mets can get a leg up on the competition if they make some aggressive moves this offseason, if they're able to avoid the same instability we've seen from them in the past. And if they do that, they'll be very well positioned here for this offseason and beyond with a very young, cost-controlled core.
Yeah, you mentioned the news of Ken Inge going to the Miami Marlins. That's huge. I mean, she has had her handprints all over many great organizations and runs, even going back to the Yankees run, being next to Cashman. She was with the Dodgers, and she is a great baseball mind, and I think she is a great fit. There were Mets fans that wanted her to be the GM a few years ago, and of course that didn't really happen, but now she gets her shot, and I'm excited to see how she does with the Marlins. Now, the Mets, they're going to bring in some reinforcements. They have the money to do so, and it makes me think, are they the team to beat in New York?
I think it's a little too soon to say because we need to see what both teams do in the offseason. So it very well could be the case that the Mets would be the team to beat. But let's see what happens with both teams in terms of free agency and the winter meetings and everything first. We can make that declaration in the spring. But yeah, we just talked about the Marlins getting a new GM. The Mets just cleaned house. Brody Van Wagenen has been let go. He's only there for 2 years. The Mets have a whole new front office. Sandy Alderson is getting a second shot to run the Mets now, and his first tenure was a bit of a mixed bag, but it also had the Wilpons fingerprints all over it. So Alderson's going to get a more legitimate chance to run the team without the interference from up top. Cohen, I think, is going to be on the same page. I think they're going to be aggressive. So there's a lot of new pieces. We'll see how long it takes for the organization to gel. So that is, a bit of an organizational chemistry factor I think you have to watch out for. But in general, I think there's little reason to doubt that it will get off to an aggressive and cohesive start from top to bottom. Cohen's interacting with players and fans on Twitter, which I think is great. He's made it very clear he is all in, and so is the whole organization. It's something we haven't seen from them in a very long time. And I went back, watched that press conference where Cohen was introduced after he was formally approved, and that is the most competent the Mets have sounded in my lifetime, without question.
Yeah, and they talk about big splashes. Two names I think of, Trevor Bauer, and one name that you might not like, DJ Lemahieu. Now, if Lemahieu makes that, if he stays in New York but goes to Queens to play for the Mets, how would you feel? Obviously, you'd be upset as a Yankee fan, but where do we go now from the Yankees? Do you think that there's a chance Lemahieu stays in New York with the Yankees, that is?
I do think there's a chance Lemahieu stays. I still think that's up in the air. I'm not feeling super strongly one way or the other about a gut feeling or anything yet. I do think that the Yankees should give him as close to a blank check as possible, especially if they can keep it for 3 or 4 years at the most, just because he's in his 30s at this point. But considering he has been by far the best and most consistent and most versatile player for the Yankees in the 2 seasons he has been with the team, he has more than proven his worth. I think the Yankees should do whatever they possibly can to keep him around. It does not have to be at second base. If I'm the Yankees, I would take a very hard, long look at possibly selling high on either Luke Voit or Gio Urshela to make room for him, because I don't think either one of their offensive productions this season is, or in Urshela's case, the last 2 seasons, is entirely sustainable. So I think the Yankees would be wise to look at moving one of them, because LeMahieu can play first or third, as he's proven in his seasons with the team. If it is true that the Yankees or the Mets are going to go after Lindor, you could move Torres to short, LeMahieu to first or third. Lindor would take over. There's a lot of options for the Yankees here. They can do pretty much any of them while keeping LeMahieu, and I think they need to make sure he is their priority.
And Lindor's an interesting topic. I think that he will end up in either New York or Cincinnati. Those are my 2 gut feelings of where Francisco Lindor will end up, because obviously the Reds, they've needed a shortstop for a long time. I mean, Cozart was good for a year or 2, but we're not here to talk about the Reds. LeMahieu, if let's say the deciding factor is he wants 5 years and the Yankees are giving him 4, but the Mets are giving him 5. What would you do in that scenario if you're the Yankees GM? Do you give him that 5th year to keep him around? Or maybe that's something that Cohen would like to say, hey, if he wants another one, why not? I mean, he's a good baseball player. I'm here to help the fans win, help the team win.
I think it's going to be a balance. The Mets are going to be more aggressive in terms of not worrying about giving out that 5th year. The Yankees have been fiddling around with the luxury tax for the better part of a few seasons now, and trying not to hamstring themselves with too many bad contracts or long-term contracts like Giancarlo Stanton's is the most obvious on the Yankees right now. Honestly, though, I think the Yankees have made it clear that they are going to be trying to win championships in the next couple of seasons here. They made that clear with the Garrett Cole signing. They said at the time they want to win multiple championships. The Yankees still have some holes to address on the roster, as usual, especially in the pitching rotation. But I think they will do whatever it takes to keep Lemahieu if they view him as an essential part of a championship team. And I think he's proven himself to be that because he has been the only really consistent hitter in the Yankee lineup. We see the ups and downs from everyone else who has a lot of value. The Aaron Judge, Gleyber Torres, even Gary Sanchez. We see flashes of brilliance from them, but not one of them can put together a consistent season on offense and defense like LeMahieu can. So I think they do view him as an essential part of the next championship team if the Yankees are going to win one with this current core.
The bottom line here is that TJ LeMahieu is going to get paid. We don't know where he's going to end up, but obviously the Yankees should probably be the number one priority for both him and the Yankees because of his success there over the years. But we're going to talk about something that isn't fun to talk about, but the White Sox new manager, Tony La Russa, has had a DUI, driving under intoxication. So what does that mean from a baseball standpoint and an organizational standpoint? They brought him in knowing they were aware of what happened when they brought him in to be the next manager of the White Sox. How did you feel when you got that news come across your screen?
It definitely caught me off guard a little bit. It honestly reminded me a little bit of just a couple weeks ago when the Buccaneers brought in Antonio Brown, knowing his most recent behavioral episode, let's call it. Tony La Russa is 76 years old. I'm not here to judge his character too much. This is his second DUI in the last, I believe, 12 years or so. It's something you can definitely keep an eye on. But it's definitely, the partnership with the White Sox and La Russa is definitely off to a rocky start. It was very clear from the moment he was hired that Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner for the White Sox, wanted to atone for a mistake he perceives that he made back in the 80s, letting La Russa go once. He's a longtime friend. He basically blindsided other White Sox officials, from what I was told, or what I read, that he was going to bring La Russa in no matter what, even though his fit with a very young, exuberant White Sox team, I'd say, is questionable. We know with Tim Anderson in particular, the whole let the kids play mindset of the White Sox. La Russa is an older, old school guy. I'm not questioning his pedigree or his qualifications as a manager, but how is he going to fit with a mostly young team of vibrant personalities? Or is anyone on the White Sox going to remember some of his controversial comments regarding Colin Kaepernick a few years ago? Are they going to have trouble playing for him due to that? It's definitely something to consider. He definitely got a big vote of confidence from the reigning AL MVP now in Jose Abreu, saying he would stand up for whatever La Russa does in that locker room, but he hasn't even managed a game yet. Things could very clearly change in that organization or any other. There's a lot to dissect in terms of La Russa's fit. And if the White Sox, if Reinsdorf prioritizing him, will ultimately detriment the team going forward.
I'm curious to see if that signing keeps free agents away, because you saw Marcus Stroman on Twitter, I think it was. He commented under saying there is no chance I'd even consider going to the White Sox with that jabroni managing the team. But here's my thing. Everyone's talking about how La Russa's so old and he's not going to gel in today's game. Now, obviously, it might change with the players, that is, because how the White Sox are built. They're a fiery and fun team to watch. They're young, they're exuberant, they're exactly what you want. But from a managerial standpoint, everyone's like, he doesn't adapt to analytics. He batted the pitcher 8th in St. Louis, and that everyone thought he was nuts for it because not a lot of managers were doing that. And that's something La Russa adapted to, and he's actually been into analytics a lot more than managers in the past. So I still think the analytical game still plays in his favor, but from a player standpoint, it's going to be hard to keep the room. So I want to see if they can all gel together and see if they can all go out at the same time and perform.
Absolutely. I don't think that calling him a dinosaur in terms of his way of thinking about the game is fair. I think it's true what you said, that it's a misconception that he doesn't value the analytics in today's game. He was a bit of a pioneer for that. He wasn't the only one, obviously. We know the famous start to that with Bill James and his teachings going in Oakland. But Russa was one of the first big-time managers to embrace that on a full-time basis. So I don't think the problem is that he will shy away from new school thinking in terms of managing the team on the field. To me, it's more he might have an old school mindset in terms of managing them in the clubhouse. Those two things can absolutely counteract each other, make it more difficult for the team to gel both on and off the field. Now, obviously, the record is the most important thing that people are going to look at the end of the day, and La Russa does have a lot of bright young talent to work with, which is great. But I do still think it is a fair question to ask, is he going to be an old school manager in terms of trying to tone down the personalities, or is he going to let these guys go be themselves out there on the field? Because whichever option he decides to go with there is going to have a huge impact on their on-field success.
One name I'd like to consider, because obviously the White Sox need some help in the rotation. How about Adam Wainwright rejuvenating with his manager there going to the White Sox? That would be interesting for sure.
Absolutely. I could see the White Sox going after somebody like that. I could see them going after a Jay Happ possibly as well, an older, moderately cheap pitcher to fill out the end of the rotation. Wainwright, seeing him leave St. Louis after all these years would be a weird sight, though. Him and Yadier Molina both, if he ends up going. But I do think it makes sense for the White Sox to go for one or two slightly more cost-controllable pitching options instead of trying to sign every top free agent on the market, because that is not going to happen. And I am very curious to see how La Russa's presence impacts the White Sox ability to bring in these top free agents, because it's going to be a question answered pretty quickly.
100%. And we're going to talk about the Chicago Bears now. The Bears dropped an ugly one on Monday night. They needed a kick return to spark the team. And the first thing that sticks out to me, obviously, is the health for quarterback Nick Foles. I mean, he's had a weird career, and you just never want to see someone like that. A class act, great guy. And just to see him go down really hurt me, because I was there in person against the Chiefs week 1 when last year he played the Chiefs in Jacksonville, and I saw that shoulder go down, and I immediately thought the Jaguars have a quarterback, because he threw a perfect pass to Chark in the end zone, and then Foles goes down with the collarbone. Of course, I didn't see that, but it just hurts me to see these injuries to star players that are highly respected. So obviously that's on my mind right now, is the injury to Nick Foles, but the Bears did not get anything done on Monday night, and I think that's an understatement.
Absolutely. I do want to reiterate what you said and put my best wishes out for Nick Foles. It did not look like a great situation there, getting carted off at the very end of the Monday night game here that just happened about 30 minutes ago. So, I know we've done these Giants Monday night reactions. We're doing the Bears this time. But the Foles news is without question the most important takeaway here going forward. Despite the fact that he is far from a perfect quarterback on the field, he is very well respected and cared for around the league, and he's unfortunately had injury problems like this in the past. So I hope that it's an Andrew Whitworth situation where it looks bad, but it's not a season-ending injury. But we'll see what happens there. In terms of the Bears game tonight against the Vikings, they really did not get anything going on the offensive side of the ball, which has been a theme all season, regardless of the quarterback. The Bears' only touchdown tonight came on a kick return. And I do want to highlight the special teams. I thought they provided the Bears a few sparks in this game, better than it typically is for them. But the Bears changed play callers, and they still just cannot get anything going on offense. And it's very clear that problem isn't going to be fixed this season.
I thought Bill Lazor did a good job in the first half, but then again, in the second half, he couldn't get anything. He didn't get a first down until the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, by the way. But it's clear that Bill Lazor, Matt Nagy, quarterbacks, it doesn't matter. This offense is not going to be successful. You could have anybody, pick your offensive coordinator, come down and run this offense, call plays, formations, all that stuff. I was curious. I don't know if this would have been a factor, but if David Montgomery was healthy, I'm really interested if that team would have done something, because they finally ran a well-balanced offense. I mean, Glazer was calling plays that were well-balanced. He ran the ball a lot, albeit with Cordero Patterson. You know how I feel about him. But anyway, I thought he did a decent job in the first half. Second half, it was awful, but you can't go back on that. It's nice to see Matt Nagy step up and take on the responsibility of saying, hey, you know what? I think Glazer gives us a better chance of winning if he calls plays. And that's something most head coaches tend to shy away from, especially being an offensive mastermind like Matt Nagy.
Absolutely. We see Nagy come from that Andy Reid coaching tree, and they're all known as offensive minds. Nagy is the second coach that we cover on this podcast that gave up play calling duties. Gase did for the Jets, but the Jets are obviously in a much different situation in the league's basement. The Bears got off to that 5-1 start. And while I think we can all agree that they should have lost at least 2 or 3 of those games, it definitely provided them with some cushion. But they have finally started to come back to earth a little bit. Their offensive luck and comebacks were not sustainable, and that is clearly showing here in the last few games. It started with I think it really started to become clear in that Saints game a couple of weeks ago. It's even more obvious now. The play calling is definitely part of the issue. Nagy has definitely had a lot of problems with that in his tenure in Chicago, but it's not all on him, offensive mind or not. The offensive line for the Bears is terrible. It really, really is. Injuries have not helped, of course, with guys like Whitehair getting injured, but they are not executing simple blocks for the most part, and there's no time for the quarterbacks to throw for the most part, and there is not much of a running game to speak of as a result, and the Bears don't have too many reliable weapons in the passing game outside of Allen Robinson. We see the flashes from Darnell Mooney, but Anthony Miller struggled again big time tonight. There's not we do see some instances with Jimmy Graham or Cole Kmet at tight end, but it's too little, too late, or too far in between. And these problems are not going to be fixed this season, regardless of the coaching staff, because the personnel isn't there. And that's not going to be fixed in one off season either. So the Bears are going to have a very challenging road to building a better offense going forward.
That's well put. I don't disagree with anything you said. And I'm going to go on a little mini rant here. And tonight, Monday, November, whatever, on Monday Night Football against, of course, the Minnesota Vikings, was the night that the Bears organization collapsed. Simple as that. This is the end of the Matt Nagy era, end of the Mitchell Trubisky era, end of the Ryan Pace era, and end of the beloved Chicago Bears. Simple as that. The defense is getting older. They're not going to win any games. I mean, they might win a few games, but look, they're not making the playoffs. I was an imbecile thinking that they would win and make the playoffs, but then, of course, I should have looked at this roster as a whole. Look, the Bears, they're such a weird team. They've been getting by with piss-poor quarterback play these few years, and it's really hamstrung them, because I thought they were good enough to win a title a few years ago if they had a capable quarterback, but they don't. I was calling for Alex Smith a few years ago. I thought a reigniting with Matt Nagy would have been nice for his career, but obviously the injury happened to him. Look, the Bears, it's over. It is. You look now, there's no hope for the future. Allen Robinson, goodbye. He's gone. He wants a quarterback, not a Bears team. The whole front office shaken up. They're going to have to draft a quarterback, and maybe that quarterback's good. But if not, there is no weapons on the team. The defense is getting older, and it's going to be bad for a long time in Chicago.
It very well could be. We did a deep dive on the Bears a couple of weeks ago, and I know I've mentioned a few times that I thought they had the weirdest offseason of any team in the league. And I think that is starting to show itself more now later in the season, now that we are 10 weeks in. The Bears are 5-5 now after a 5-1 start. They have a lot of question marks. Now, I want to give some credit, just looking at tonight's game, for the run defense in particular, especially before Akeem Hicks got hurt, because Hicks is one of the most underrated and best defensive tackles in the NFL. And Dalvin Cook was shut down pretty well all night. The Vikings didn't really go ahead and end up winning that game until they started getting Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen involved in the fourth quarter. So the Bears defense once again keeps them in the game. The special teams was better than usual. Cordero Patterson Anderson was very clearly looking to make a statement against his former team in Minnesota. But I don't know if I'm ready to say that the era is over yet. But at the same time, I'd say it's fair to, I'd argue that era never really begun. The Bears lucked their way into a 12-4 season, or I think a better term is defended their way into a 12-4 season, despite some offensive flaws. And one of the pieces of feedback I got from that big deep dive episode a couple weeks ago, we talked about Mark Trestman a little bit, and I still stand by that he was far from perfect, but the Bears had some of the statistically best offenses in the NFL in his years in Chicago with Jay Cutler and Alshon Jeffrey and guys like that. And it's amazing just how far the Bears offense has fallen since. Now, Trubisky, of course, hasn't worked out. Hindsight's 2020 on that. We'll see if he gets a few more starts now with the Foles injury. But he is clearly not going to be the long-term answer in Chicago. Neither is Nick Foles. And the offensive line was a problem going back to those days with Mark Trestman when right before Ryan Pace came in. It's just been a recurring problem for the Bears, who have had pretty questionable quarterback play most of our lives. And they could try to get one in the draft, but odds are they're going to have to trade up if they really want to get one of the best ones. They won enough games at the beginning of the season where they're going to be most likely stuck in the middle, as it's called, where they're going to get a middling draft pick, and they could take a swing for somebody like the Browns did with DeShone Kizer, the Jets did with Geno Smith in the second round. But if they're really serious about getting Lawrence, or a more likely scenario is Justin Fields or a Zach Wilson, Kyle Trask, they're going to have to trade up to do it. And they're going to have to give up a couple more picks. It did not work out very well with Trubisky, obviously. Do you think the Bears are willing to take a big swing like that again? And if so, do you think it's enough to save Nagy and Pace's jobs? Because I honestly don't know if it is.
I don't think they're there. That's what I meant by the era. I didn't mean like it was a good era of winning era. I'm saying the whole entire collective group. I mean, they fired everybody when Trestman was there. I mean, look, it's Pace, it's Nagy. They're both gone. They're going to bring him in. I wouldn't be shocked to see Louis Riddick get that GM job in Chicago. You bring in a new head coach, whoever it may be. You put them together and you just try to build this team. And do I think Louis Riddick could make a move like that? I think he could. I think anybody could go up and make that move because once again, and I think Bears fans would be fine with that, with them going up and making a move like that because it's not Ryan Pace going after the quarterback. Now, if it's Ryan Pace that moves up in the draft, Bears fans will be so livid that they won't even turn on their televisions on Sunday.
And I completely would understand why. I mean, what I meant was with Ryan Pace, it was such a mixed bag for him in terms of free agent signings and draft picks. It's hard to say that he ever really put his fingerprints on the team, or that even John Fox or now Nagy has really put their fingerprints on the team other than bad play calling. Now, that's the one signature that we can take from one of these important figures in the Bears organization. That's kind of where I was going with it. I don't think it's a bad idea at all for the Bears to consider a shakeup. Now, of course, the offensive line has been a big part of it, and the coaches aren't maximizing their players on the offensive side of the ball. It's in the defense is still productive. They have a couple of younger pieces on it. I like what I've seen from Jalen Johnson a lot, for example. Eddie Jackson has been a great fit. So there are some younger players, but most of the guys that are there right now are at the tail end of their prime. So it's not a sustainable formula. I agree with that for sure. And once the defense, if it does start to decline even a little, we're going to see the Bears losing a lot of games by a lot of points if they continue with anything even remotely resembling the Bears' current offense. So they do need to make a few big swings at the very least with their personnel. And I don't think it would be a bad idea to consider making a couple of big swings in the front office or in the coaching staff either.
Yeah, I do think change is coming to the Bears. I mean, look, every single Chicago sports team we talk about has just been in shambles. You don't even know what the problem is. Cubs fans think it's Joe Madden. David Ross comes in, the offense is still broken. Maybe it's Theo. You know, you don't know. Go over to the Bears. Is it the quarterback? Is it the play calling? Is it the weapons? Is it the line? Is it the, I mean, oh my gosh, this is just getting old. The White Sox, was it the manager? We'll find out. Anyway, the Bulls, was it Garpax? I don't know. We'll find out. Let's see. Blackhawks. Is it Bowman? Probably. We'll find out about them as well. But I mean, every single Chicago sports team, everyone's wondering, why hasn't there been success since the Blackhawks won in 2015 and the Cubs in 16, of course? It's because they're treading water. they're treading water in every single sport to where they're not in a position to build a legit dynasty or at least build a championship team. They're just stuck in the middle to where they're not tanking, they're not losing, but they're doing enough that just makes it's just something's under the Chicago fans' nails and they can't get to it. And it's just so annoying for them to just get after it.
Well, if the Bears do bring in a new GM, he has to be brave to really suck for a couple of years. And that if he does take a big swing like that, whoever it is, that is most likely what would happen. The Bears would most likely bottom out for a couple seasons, but theoretically that would lay the foundation for a championship contender down the road. That's what they need, is a true rebuild if they cannot maximize this current roster. And I think it's becoming clear that they're not going to. Allen Robinson is gone after the season. We all know that. And he is the most reliable weapon the Bears have. And outside of that, there are a lot of question marks, mostly on the offensive side of the ball. And the defensive side of the ball, like I said, is not going to be this reliable forever. These players aren't going to be this productive forever. So if the Bears do bring in a new executive, that executive has to be brave to really tear it down, because the Bears really haven't done that in recent years. We've seen them try a few different things. We've seen them try stopgaps at free agent quarterback, like a Mike Glennon, for example. And we've seen them try bringing in a couple guys in the draft who have had mixed success at best, I think is a fair assessment there. So if they're serious, it would start, I think, with the change up top, because I think we're getting an idea of what the Bears' current philosophy is. And if they were to make a big swing at this point, it would be too late, because Pace is in his 6th season with the Bears as their GM. This is Nagy's 3rd season. I know he doesn't want to give up on this current roster that has gotten him a decent amount of wins, but I think it's clear that the Bears have reached their ceiling. They're going to be a middling team at best with their current roster, and they don't have the foundation for a championship team, especially in the offensive side of the ball. And if they're going to build one, they're most likely going to have to start from scratch.
And if they do, so say they get a new GM coming in there, building this team up, like you said, he has to have the cojones to just tank, lose these next two, not necessarily tank, but just lose enough games to where it gets you draft picks, accumulate them, hit on those draft picks. That's the big key. Hit on those draft picks. If you don't hit on them, then what are you doing? So if he can do that, look, now's the time to do it. The new GM that comes in, if you do not find any success right away and you still are hitting on some of these picks, now's the time. Look at the division. Aaron Rodgers going to be dwindling out. Will they try Jordan Love? Maybe. Who knows what he's going to do. The Vikings, I highly doubt Kirk Cousins will be there beyond the next 2 years. Stafford's aging a little bit in Detroit. I think Detroit's primed to make a little bit of a jump here in the next few years, maybe 3rd place in that division, if not 2nd. But the Bears, they're going to be in the basement of the NFC North for a few years now, and it's going to be something to keep an eye on. If they end up going with that route of tanking those 2 years, now's the time while Rodgers is still getting older to where if they are good in the next 2 years, they can make that jump to absolutely dominate some of these teams.
It is possible. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of variables there, and most of them have to hit for it to work out in that scenario. But it is what Bears fans should at least be considering here. If they start to tear down now, while the other 3 teams in the division are not in the position to do so, they can start trending down for now, but then hopefully start to trend up as these factors for the Packers and the Lions and the Vikings start to die out. There's a lot to consider with every single one of those teams, but if the Bears can bottom out first and then build back up the quickest while the other teams start to decline a little bit, that could be a best case scenario, but that's a lot easier said than done.
Absolutely. That would be a lot easier said than done, but we finally have a scenario. Yes, you're not dreaming here, Swig. You are present, alive right now. Pinch yourself. The Giants beat the Eagles.
It's about damn time, man. LeBron after a championship, but no, it followed a very similar script to a lot of Giants games in this season against Philadelphia, and then just the last few seasons against the Eagles. The Giants build an early lead, and for once, they do not blow it in the 4th quarter. It's about time. So the Giants have won 2 games in a row now, and at 3-7 are amazingly in contention in the NFC East. I don't know how I feel about that for long term for the Giants because they are screwing themselves a bit here in the draft. They seem a lot less likely to get a top 5 pick now, but the Giants are going into their bye week here coming up with 2 straight wins over divisional opponents. And it's definitely a step in the right direction in terms of finally getting that monkey off of their back, finally beating a rival they've had a lot of trouble with in recent years. And hopefully that momentum will carry over for the next game in Cincinnati in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it was a statement game for the Giants. It's about time they finally beat someone that isn't Washington, right? You know, Daniel Jones finally getting his demons off his back, beating someone that, I mean, that's his first win outside of Washington since his first ever start against Tampa Bay. So that's kudos to him. Once again, he played turnover-free ball, which is good. Not something that he's used to doing, but he finally did it. And another name on defense that stepped up for another week is Jabril Peppers. He looked good again.
He did. I'll start with the offensive side of the ball here. Let's start with Jones, the most important player on the team right now. He kind of bottomed out, in that Tampa Bay game a couple weeks ago with the mind-numbing turnovers. He has very clearly been protecting the ball a little bit more, which I think is great. The Washington game plan was very, very conservative for the most part, just trying to make sure the Giants didn't make any mistakes, letting Washington make them. And it worked out because Washington turned it over 5 times in that game. But the Giants and Eagles here on Sunday, Jones and Carson Wentz are the 2 most turnover-prone quarterbacks in the NFL, and go figure, neither of them turned the ball over. There were no turnovers in the game. So the Giants defense had to step up when it mattered, but I'll get to them in a second. The offensive side of the ball, Jones, I thought, had what might have been the best game of his career, at the very least, the most important game of his career. I know it doesn't look like much on paper, but the Giants finally beating Philadelphia, having a game that actually has playoff implications in November, as weird as that is the Giants' biggest win in 4 seasons, at the very least, when they made the playoffs in 2016, right? They are only a game and a half back of Philadelphia here. They both have tough schedules going forward, and the Giants do not play Philadelphia or Washington again this season. They have one more divisional game against Dallas. There are a few encouraging signs. I think the coaching staff is starting to get this team in the right direction. We've seen them lose a lot of close games so far this season, but the running game and the offensive line have been much improved in the last couple of weeks. There was only one direction to go, but it's still very encouraging to see them making progress in the run game, despite rotating in offensive linemen, despite rotating in a couple different running backs due to injuries. It's good to have Sterling Shepard back on the team. He's the Giants' best route runner. So there are some encouraging signs on the offensive side of the ball. I think the ceiling is limited for the offense, but Jones, his running ability is a dimension that the Giants have not had at the quarterback position. It was a huge factor in the Philadelphia game. He ran in for 1 touchdown and didn't trip this time, and almost ran in another one before Gallman went in, and Gallman's played very well. I want to get into him in a second, but there are some factors to build on, and the Giants are the only team in that division who are trending up at the moment, which is weird to say, but it's the truth.
Yeah, Daniel Jones, you could even use the plural in that with the Philadelphia games. He's ran the ball well. I mean, he's been great. The Giants are successful when Jones runs the ball, and he runs it a lot. I think that's what they need to start doing. With no Saquon Barkley, I question what they could be doing right now with Saquon Barkley. I mean, they're in contention for a division without their best player, so that's big time. Gallman has stepped up. You mentioned he only had 2.9 yards per carry in the game on Sunday, but still 2 touchdowns. It's nice to get in the end zone like that. And I think Alfred Morris has been just enough to be a capable change of pace back, and he's still shown some life in his legs, which is surprising to me.
Absolutely. Well, look at the running backs really quick. Gallman was a 4th-round pick for the Giants back in 2017, and the Giants had Rashad Jennings back then. I don't know why Gallman didn't get a lot of snaps under McAdoo that year, but amazingly enough, he's one of the longest tenured Giants at this point. Gallman was the backup to Saquon Barkley for the last 2 seasons and the very beginning of this one, I guess, under Shermer in 2018 and 19 and Joe Judge now. But I want to focus on 2019 here for a minute, because 2018, Barkley was fully healthy, and I understand Gallman not getting on the field too much for that. But last year, Barkley missed a few games with the sprained ankle, and Gallman, for a lot of that, was not the main guy. The Giants had John Hilliman, of all people, as the starting running back, or a guy getting most of the carries for a couple of weeks, a practice squad guy out of Rutgers. And then later in the season, they had Buck Allen, the former Raven, getting the carries instead of Wayne Gallman, which I always found really strange because in his limited opportunities, he has produced. And that's the most important thing here. And even this year, after Barkley gets hurt, he's behind Devontae Freeman, who was signed off the street, and Dion Lewis to an extent. And Lewis has never been a great runner. He has assets in other areas. So he's finally getting the opportunity and he's running with it, no pun intended, which is great. Alfred Morris has been pretty solid after the Tampa Bay game. He was great against Washington last week, and it's good. And the offensive line's improvement. Shane Lemieux has come in, and even Andrew Thomas, they've both been very solid in run protection. The pass protection is still a concern, but the offensive line has been significantly better. They're rotating in Matt Parrott at tackle and rotating in Lemieux and Hernandez now that he's back at guard. And I think that is a testament to the Giants offensive line coach and Mark Colombo, because we are seeing significant improvement in the middle of the season. And with everything going on right now, that's not easy to do.
Yeah, and you did hear that right. You said John Hilleman, not Ronnie Hillman. So that running back was absolutely a no-name that started games for him a few years ago. But it's nice to see the line step up. I mean, that's something. If they are run blocking well right now, it brings me back to my point about if Saquon Barkley was healthy, because that would be a lot. I still have my questions about Saquon Barkley. I think he's one of the worst pass protection running backs to ever step foot on a football field. So anyway, so going from him, there's this Giants team. I mean, they're still sticking around, which is very interesting. They have some weapons on the outside. I like Shepard. I like Slayton in a deep threat spot, but I mean, they're just hanging around. Ingram didn't have the best week. He had consecutive pretty solid weeks, but I mean, as long as they got the job done, that's all that matters. And the defense is finally playing ball too for them.
Absolutely. And I'll get to the defense here in just a second, but I do want to bring up one more point about the offense first. One of the reasons the Giants have had more success the last couple of weeks, despite the running backs, is because the Giants are finally running more zone reads or RPOs for Daniel Jones and really making him an asset in the run game. They didn't do that the first couple of weeks very often when Barkley was still healthy. Now that he's out, it's forced Garrett to be a little bit more creative. And I do want to give him some credit where it's due here. I'm still not a big fan of Jason Garrett as the long-term offensive coordinator or play caller for the team, but it has been significantly better the last 3 or 4 games. I would say he's clearly being more creative in terms of trick plays and getting Jones involved in the running game. And there was one thing that the Giants finally did in this game that we really haven't seen too much from them. The Giants had the 11-point lead at halftime. The Eagles go right down the field, cut it to 3 to start the third quarter. This time, the Giants had an aggressive response, something that we really have not seen from them in a long time. Gallman got stuffed on first down on the drive right after the Eagles cut the lead to 3. And Garrett was really, really aggressive on the next 2 plays. And Jones had his 2 best throws of the game on a back shoulder to Shepard on second down for about 30 yards, and then another 30 yards to Golden Tate on basically the same play to the other side. Giants went right back down the field and scored a touchdown, pushed it back up to 10. We have not seen them do that in a very long time. It's a very encouraging response, I would say. And then even more so, I actually want to give Jason Garrett particular praise at the end of the game when the Giants were up by 7 and on second down calling that deep shot to Darius Slayton, which was another great throw and a great adjustment from Slayton to pull in the catch for 40 yards. But that got the Giants in field goal range. It allowed Graham Gano, who's been great all season, to ice the game with another field goal. And I do want to point that out. It's a very clear contrast from the beginning of the season when it was almost entirely way too conservative for the Giants. The Giants have been more aggressive in recent weeks. The first Gallman touchdown was on 4th and 1 from the 2-yard line. They went for it instead of kicking a field goal. I fully endorse that. Even though they are still unlikely to win more than a couple more games with their remaining schedule, they need to maximize their opportunities and not let things pass them by like they were doing earlier. And this was the best example so far of Garrett being aggressive, and I want to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, that's definitely good for Jason Garrett to adapt to what he has there. And it seems like ever since that late Monday night game, the one against the Bucs a few weeks ago, when all game the analysts on ESPN, Monday Night Football, they were talking all game about Jones just throwing the ball away, going down on that game-winning drive, or not game-winning, but game almost tying drive if it wasn't for the whole scenario with Golden Tate, all that stuff. Anyway, he threw the ball away. Daniel Jones threw the ball away. Since he made that decision, he has been a very good quarterback for this team. And I know you want to get into the defense here. What did you saw something on tape that really stood out about how the Giants have been approaching something on the defensive side? Why don't you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure, sure. So I do want to put out the disclaimer here that it was about an article I read that kind of led me to see it. So I've been looking at the Draft Network a lot. I want to give them a big shout out. I'm learning a lot in terms of breaking down tape and evaluating players and things like that. I have the NFL Game Pass. I like to go through and try to pick up little observations when I can and break down film after the games. And I look forward to doing one for an actual win here in a couple of days. But one thing the Giants have done to really unleash Leonard Williams in particular in Patrick Graham's defense is use what's called a tight front, which basically means they have 3 down linemen. They have one of them lined up directly over the center as a zero technique, and Williams and usually either BJ Hill when he was healthy or possibly even Lorenzo Carter as the other down linemen as defensive ends lined up over the inside shoulder of the tackle. And they've been doing that a decent amount. It's kind of a trend that's emerged across the league, and it's been very effective because when you have the defensive tackle lined up right over the center, it forces not only the center to be anchored right away, right after he snaps the ball, but the guards have to pay attention to them a little bit and have to pay attention to the defensive ends who are at the inside shoulder of the tackle. So it a lot of times allows the pocket to collapse. The Giants have been manufacturing pressure as a pass rush using that front a little bit because we've harped on they do not have a very good pass rusher or a guy who can win one-on-one battles, but they managed to get 3 sacks of Carson Wentz because they've been a little bit more creative, and their defensive tackles, their interior linemen like Dexter Lawrence and Dalvin Tomlinson are able to collapse the pocket a little bit. So the defense has been overachieving all season. I think Patrick Graham deserves a lot of credit, but one thing I really want to highlight here that's amazing is the Giants did not allow a 3rd down conversion in this game. The Eagles were 0 for 9. I could not tell you the last time they haven't allowed a single 3rd down conversion. And it really forced the Eagles to either punt or they took a lot of penalties because of the confusing looks, and it made a big difference in the game.
Yeah, and this Eagles team is now at full strength, or at least as full as they can get right now. You mean they got Alshon Jeffrey back; he played limited snaps. They had Miles Sanders back, and that's just it's nice to see them locking down a pretty solid offense when all on paper. Obviously, they haven't performed this year, but now they're finally all healthy, and the Giants' defense is really starting to look like a great team.
Well, overall, I still think it's a league average defense because there are a couple of very clear weak spots on the team. I do think Patrick Graham deserves a lot of credit, but the Giants' run defense, which is typically one of their strengths, was pretty bad in this Eagles game. I thought that was one of the weak spots. Sanders was getting 5 or 6 yards on every carry. He looked very good. And then giant killer Boston Scott, screw that guy, gets a 56-yard touchdown on one of his few touches. It was a bit of a concerning trend there because usually run defense is a better aspect for the Giants. But overall, I was pretty impressed, especially in the passing game. And James Bradbury, again, was off the charts in this game. He finally showed signs of being human a little bit in that Tampa Bay game, but he's been right back to locking everyone down since. And he made 2 plays that I really want to highlight in this game. The first one was back in the first quarter. The Eagles had a 3rd and 3, I believe, and they tried a bit of a pick play to his side of the field. Bradbury recognizes it, fights through, and gets a pass defended on the attempted conversion to Jalen Reagor. And then in the fourth quarter, when the Eagles went for it on 4th and 10, down by 7, he made a fantastic play to play up through the hands of the wide receiver. I think they were targeting Reagor again. I thought it was a bit of a weird call from Doug Peterson to specifically target Bradbury on a 4th and 10, but he made a fantastic play on the ball, got the Giants the ball back, and they eventually went down and kicked that field goal that made it a 2-score game. So he was fantastic. Jabril Peppers was all over the field again. This was his 3rd straight strong game, I would say. And he made a big impact as a punt returner as well. We saw flashes of that in the season opening game against the Steelers, but they finally put him back there, and he was averaging 12 yards at punt return and giving the Giants good field position as well.
Yeah, special teams has been great for the Giants all year. You look at Graham Gano getting himself a contract extension. I mean, that guy's been banging him through the uprights this year. He doesn't miss. So that's big for them. And like you said, Bradbury, look, Travis Fulgham, their receiver that was coming off of great weeks, rookie wide receiver there in Philly, he only had 1 catch on 5 targets, and Bradbury was on him for I'd probably say the majority of the game, and he locked him down. I mean, simple as that. Fulgham's someone that's really been their number one go-to guy in that offense, and he had nowhere to go on Bradbury. That's a great find for the GM to bring him in. And here's one bold prediction here. The reason I think the Giants will end up winning the division, and the reason because of that is when Xavier McKinney will come back and have a huge impact on that team and send the Giants over the top.
I'm very excited to see what McKinney does. It sounds like he's getting closer. Hopefully, we'll see if he's ready to play for them after the bye. I do think it would be a very interesting look for the Giants to finally have that versatility at the safety spot with him, Jabril Peppers, and Logan Ryan, if they're all healthy. Logan Ryan has played pretty well this season as well. I know I haven't talked about him a lot, but he came in late, not too long before the season started, and he's played pretty well for the most part. He had the game-sealing interception against Washington last week, but he's been pretty solid in coverage and one of our better tacklers. Blake Martinez deserves a lot of credit for his sure tackling as well. I wasn't a huge fan of that signing, but he has thoroughly been better than Corey Littleton, who I'll frankly say I wanted instead and as a free agent. But he has been a find. The Giants have done a good job in this season, at least in free agency on the defensive side. Special teams, Gano has been fantastic. He made a couple more field goals that contract extensions deserved if he's going to keep kicking like this. And it would be nice for the Giants not to have that same situation drama at kicker that they've had with Josh Brown and Aldrick Rosas in recent years. Just one less distraction to worry about. Even Riley Dixon, the punter, a Syracuse grad, I might add. He had a couple of fantastic punts in this game that flipped the field because the Eagles were either unwilling or unable to field a punt. And he had a 71-yarder that pinned the Eagles back at their own 5-yard line and a couple inside the 20. So the special teams, that's Joe Judge's background as a head coach. So I'm not too surprised to see them starting to be sufficient in that area, but it is an encouraging sign. Hopefully it's a trend that can continue the rest of the season.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Giants and struggling with another thing going on with the kickers. You know, Josh Brown and Aldrick Rosas. That brings us to our next point about DeAndre Baker. Baker was found not guilty. We talked about him early on about the whole nightclub and playing blackjack or whatever, the whole scenario that broke down with him. He is now going to be a free agent, and since he pleaded not guilty, I would assume teams would be interested in bringing him in.
Oh, he's going to get signed by another team. There's no question in my mind. There have been several already in contact with him. I know I gave Dave Gettleman a lot of crap for the Baker situation, and I still stand by that because Joe Judge has made it clear he is not going to put up with any of this behavioral bullshit, if we're being honest here. He suspended Golden Tate for a game last week, a veteran guy, because he kind of mouthed off after the Tampa Bay game, and he was sat down for the Washington game. So Judge is making it very clear that he's trying to build a certain culture in the organization, and that means DeAndre Baker is not going to be a part of it. Honestly, I would have been okay with bringing him back. I do usually believe in second chances, and it would have been nice to try to get something out of a first-round pick that the Giants traded up for. I do wish DeAndre Baker well, though, with whatever team he signs with, especially if it's not a rival of the Giants. But, the guy's 23 years old, I believe. He's got his whole life in front of him. There are more important things sometimes than football, and I'm glad to see that the charges have been dropped. I'm hoping that he can continue his NFL career, and I'm sure he will, at least for the time being. But it is a shame that the Giants cut him so quickly during the legal process. I was a little surprised by that because he could have been put on the exempt list, but Joe Judge and the organization are clearly sending a message that they don't want to put up with any of that type of behavior. They're building a certain culture. It's starting to show results. So hopefully that doesn't turn out to backfire too much, but it is going to be something to keep an eye on because the Giants do have a very clear weak spot at corner. They did bring in Quincy Wilson to the practice squad, the former second-round pick who played with the Colts and the Jets. But if there was one guy coming into the season who was the most likely to step up and be a solid corner across from Bradbury, Baker was the guy.
Yeah, 100%. Him, you've even seen Julian Love a little bit. He's more of a safety now, but I'm interested to see Love's role if he ends up going to a cornerback spot fully when McKinney's healthy. I mean, that's something to keep an eye on for them. But here we are with another thing I want to bring up real quick. Joe Judge is now the second consecutive, at least I think, the second consecutive New England coach that took over a team that's been treading water or bad. Simple as that. First one I'm talking about, Brian Flores goes to Miami. He has a great second half, learns how to coach in the NFL, and now look at his team. He's in prime position and, dare I say it, AFC East champs, Miami Dolphins. Now, the Giants, I think they got a similar thing here with Joe Judge. He's someone that is just a nice head coach. It's fun to have special teams that is your number one priority as head coach because, I mean, you know a lot about it, and you can really mess with some teams by maybe running some tricks that you've learned over the years.
Well, honestly, I love the Flores comparison because one thing I said about Brian Flores throughout last season, off pod, just in general, is that even though the Dolphins roster was clearly lacking in talent last season, Flores had them playing hard, which is a great sign for a head coach. They started to win a few more games later in the season. We're starting to see some of that with the Giants right now as well, despite the fact that they still clearly lack a lot of talent in several key areas. They are still playing hard in every game. That San Francisco game in week 3 was the only one that wasn't competitive. The Giants have been playing hard and have been in pretty much every game since, and they're finally starting to turn some of these close games into wins. And it is following a similar blueprint to what the Dolphins had last season. There are still a lot of long-term question marks for the Giants and holes to fill. And with how good Patrick Graham has done in terms of overachieving with his defense, I don't think it's out of the question to say that he'll be looked at as a potential head coaching candidate down the line. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But overall, it is encouraging to see that the team is playing hard for Judge. We haven't quite seen that under Ben McAdoo or especially Pat Shurmur the last couple of seasons. So I do think it's a step in the right direction. There is a long way to go, but it is progress.
Yeah, it's nice to have someone playing for your head coach. I mean, as you know, maybe you don't, to all the listeners, my team is the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, I've kind of hid that under the radar here for a little bit, but my team's the Jaguars, and they played strong for Doug Marrone in his early tender. And over the years, it's sort of just been like, okay, this guy's a nincompoop. We're not going to play for him now. I mean, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going for it on every fourth down. And I mean, he's a mess there. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic. That's the point right there, is that Joe Judge is going to be a great NFL head coach. He's got the room. That's something that a lot of coaches don't have. I mean, Adam Gase doesn't have the room. So that's someone that doesn't. I mean, having the room is huge because then your guys feel comfortable going up to you and asking you any question, whether it's life or football.
Absolutely. I do think we're starting to see a bit of a culture change. I am very curious to see how sustainable this is, though. Overall, I still do not think that Dave Gettleman or Jason Garrett would be the right people for their respective jobs. And if Gettleman does end up getting fired at some point, and the most likely way that would happen is if Jones reverts back to his previous Tampa Bay game tendencies and the Giants bottom out, I like Joe Judge, but if the Giants do decide to make a big swing here, like we talked about the Bears potentially doing, I don't think Judge would stick around under a new GM who would want to bring in his own guys. So there are a lot of long-term questions for the team because I still stand by that there have been a lot of questionable or bad choices made both in free agency and the draft over the last couple of years. And I still have a lot of doubts that the right people are in place to fully right the ship, but there have been small signs of progress and steps in the right direction here. And what should have been a more of a rebuilding year, I still think ultimately that's what this is for the Giants, and that them making the playoffs might make it a little bit more difficult to get a foundational piece in next year's draft. But it is good to see the signs of progress in the organization, and it's hopefully something they can build on.
And that brings us to our poll question of the week. Our poll question of the week comes out on Twitter, Big City Sports PD. And you will see it every Monday. We drop them, or actually Tuesday. You will see it Tuesday mornings will be the poll question of the week. This week, it is, who is more likely to make the postseason, the beloved Chicago Bears or the New York Giants? That's going to be an interesting poll. I think a lot of people will vote on that one, and I'm interested to see if it's split. I think the Giants will win the poll, but I mean, I guess we'll find out on that front. Anyway, stay tuned here to the Big City Sports Podcast. We mentioned NBA draft breakdown of the picks that took place on Wednesday night. We're going to launch that out on Saturday. So be ready. Usually it's just Thursdays at noon we drop these things, but be tuned on Saturday. We're going to drop the NBA review of what took place, maybe even some free agency moves. I expect the NBA free agency to be absolutely insane this year, and I can't wait for it. But anyways, signing off, this is Dylan Kearns and Swig. We'll see you next time.